We get to the access to information because I was wondering, when it comes to censorship, particularly when it is advanced by government bodies, for example, like what you're talking about, the Communication Authority of Kenya, how does the media protect itself from, the corrosion of its space by agencies such as that?
Well, as you have seen with that case, is that members of the civil society ran to court and obtained some orders that suspended that letter. But also, there's now going to be a process of litigation which will clarify where these powers lie and how they are to be exercised. So, again, going back to the point where I said that our courts have really been instrumental in protecting freedom of expression, access to information, freedom of the freedom and independence of the media. And so through strategic litigation or public interest litigation, we have seen interventions by courts, which are still part of the government, that have expanded these rights. And over the last decade, we saw the Security Laws Amendment Act that had some punitive provisions that, for example, a journalist had to get permission from the Inspector General of Police before reporting on the terrorism activities. You see, that was struck down. We've had criminal defamation removed from our statute books. We've had a law called undermining authority of a public officer removed from our statute books. And so we are seeing progress that have come from our courts.
Absolutely. And we've come from far. In terms of advancing these are the human rights through freedom of expression, the access to information is a critical cog in the sense of it, because investigative journalism can actually come from access to information, or even get to expose some of the scandals happening in government institutions or elsewhere. But I'm just wondering, when we talk about the right of information, disclosure of public disclosure by public institutions about probably expenditure or the ongoings in public institutions. Sometimes when you sit down and think about the Access to Information Act, why does it sometimes look like a suggestion, like it has never been taken seriously in the country?
Yes, it is sort of, the problem is sort of a cultural thing where we have not really wrapped our heads around the power of the Access to Information Act, the power of being entitled to any information. By the way, you don't even have to say why you want the information, as long as the information does not touch on national security, for example. And the Access to Information Act actually recognizes journalists as people who are allowed to to have more access to information. But we have not seen robust use of that act by even journalists, but we have also not seen public institutions that are held accountable.
When you say robust, because I want us to go to the PS for correctional services, when you say robust use, are you saying that the media has not actively asked for this information?
Yes. That's what I'm saying. And I can
never mind, we asked for the contract of the standard gauge railway.
Yes, and it came
way later after a new administration came in.
Yes. And you see, such laws have something called a clawback clause that tries to protect the government from certain information that may jeopardize its economic life, may jeopardize national security, for example. But such clawbacks have to be very specific. And in that SGR case, it is indeed the truth that Kenyans needed to know how much and how that money was given out and how it was used. And so that is a case where access to information was not really
quite interesting. We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in a bit. But let's head over to the Insurance Plaza. Zainab Said is on standby with the Principal Correctional Services, Mary Mudhoni. Zainab, over to you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much. This is a visit to our Probation and Aftercare Center. Probation and Aftercare Center has 135 court stations. We should have 47 county stations with county directors, respective county directors, 11 region stations, and 9 institutions. So when we talk about correctional services, we talk about prisons and probation. And we can see that probation equally has stations across the country. Some of these stations is Likoni Community Resource Center, which I have visited, Shanzu Junior School and the Junior School. These are school-going young boys who are put in one center, but they are allowed to go to normal schools, and but they come back to the station, to the probation hostel. That is their home. Then we have Shanzu Junior Going School, and also Kemomo, which has junior and senior. When we talk about the senior school, it means vocational training. Those young men and women who have been held or put in one place, and they do vocational training like mercenary. If you go to Kemomo Boys, the wall that is constructed there has been done by our boys who have been learning on how to do mercenary. And this is very key for them as they are being corrected and ready for reintegration in our society. We also have Nakuru Probation Hostel. We also have junior and vocational training. And we have Webuye Community Resource Center. We also have Siaya. The Siaya Probation Hostel is for special needs, that for girls only. Girls who have special needs. There are those young girls who get pregnant, for instance, and we have to contain them as we guide them on how to go on with life, having made small mistakes here and there in the community. So they are held there instead of releasing them to the public, and they become a public risk. And we also have, in Nairobi, we have Makadara, which is a very large probation hostel. Therefore, probation and aftercare is a very key unit in correctional services, as you can see. And they are joined at the hips by with prisons. They work very closely. And in our department, we are saying we are delivering as one, both probation and prison. The probation, they contain, and prisons, they contain, and probation, they deal with the non-custodial services. Those are people who are working in our communities. Those are people who, young boys and girls who are held in the hostels. They may have done something, committed a crime out there. And because of age matters, sometimes they are not mixed up with others. You also realize that with probation, apart from the probation hostels, we also have 3 juvenile institutions in the country. They also contain young people, just like probation. And that is why I am on my familiarizing tour on the probation and aftercare services, so that we can see how best we can improve. It is also a unit that is very key in terms of our policy formulation, our legal entities, legal documents, looking into areas where we can improve on our policy. And we have been able to do really well, especially on the children's policy, which is in force right now. We are working together closely with the prisons and probation to see that we have also worked on the Prisons Act, the Probation Act, and any other legal notices that we may need to improve. Remember, anywhere without a structure and without guidance, guiding documents, guidelines, it becomes very hard to deliver. And that is why we are very keen about legal and policy documentation. Thank you. Thank you, Tosha. Mulisahau kuja hapa.
Well, PS Mary Mudhoni, the Principal Secretary, Correctional Services, speaking exclusively to KBC and to Zainab Said about some of the reforms being sought by the Correctional Services Department, some of them being decongestion and ensuring the welfare of prisoners in our correctional facilities. And of course, part of a concern by that ministry is that most of the people we have in our prisons are actually remandees, and therefore consuming government resources without really having been sentenced. We're still here with Kiprono from the Media Complaints Commission, and we're talking about the World Press Freedom Day upcoming tomorrow. And we were talking about access to information. And Kiprono appeared to say probably the media has not taken up that provision as much. And probably we stand in the dock about that. But the biggest problem lies on the other side. The people who are supposed to provide this public information. Do they take this piece of legislation as a finality, so much so that if I request for this information, it's supposed to be availed? And of course, you're talking about inhibitions also that appear there, national security, things like that. I mean, what is the definition of national security, for example? Has it been defined so clearly? So much so that if I ask for information, you will not use national security as the reason why I will not get that information.
Any limitation to rights, especially the right to freedom of expression, right to information, freedom of the media, must be precise, must avoid being overbroad. And so whenever someone is trying to limit a right, it is upon them to prove why that limitation needs to be there. And so that is what should be happening. And I guess the Access to Information Act and breathing life to it is also the work of the Commission on Administration of Justice, because it now sits under them to monitor and to and also to implement. And we should see more people being taken to court for failing to honor this access to information rights. Because the thinking is all the information the government holds, it holds on our behalf. And we are the sovereign people of Kenya. So all the information should be given to us, except when that information now jeopardizes other things. And if it jeopardizes other things, you need to be very clear what it jeopardizes and how it does.
I'm asking so because we have an incident in Shakahola.
Yes.
Very horrid. But you will still find government really struggling to keep journalists at bay, so much so that you don't access the Shakahola scene. First of all, what do you think about that action taken by the Ministry of Interior?
I think it was not wise, because such an occurrence is quite unique. It is very tragic, and we need all the information to ensure that it doesn't happen again. We need to know what happened, and we also need to know what the government is doing about it. It is our right. And so the government with the media fraternity can work together to ensure that reportage continues even as the operations are going on. The media operate under a code of conduct and media ethics. And I do not think any person in the Fourth Estate can block or impede or jeopardize operations or investigations that are happening in that scene of a crime. And we know that sometimes even the government takes journalists to the front line of wars. You know, those arrangements can be made.
Quite interesting. Now let's talk about the other elephant in the room. The responsibility of the media, because sometimes we just look at the other players and what they're doing, towards advancing this. But the media itself, do you think at some point we shoot ourselves in the foot in terms of either how we report things or how we cover things?
I would hesitate to criticize the media so much, but I think the media can do more to protect its own rights. I have been involved in certain, for example, cases, litigations that have been filed by civil society instead of the media to protect media freedom. I remember in 2017 when there was a media shutdown. Who went to court? It was Okiya Omtata. And then the media entered into an agreement with government, so they withdrew whatever case was in there. And another occurrence is when journalists are attacked and hurt. Sometimes you find that the media houses where they come from are not really that bothered about the occurrence. They do not encourage them to seek redress mechanisms. And so there's much to be done, but the media is quite an organized group in Kenya. Yeah.
I want to read you a line here of a report that says that media reports sometimes fluctuate from critical to concordant clientelist reporting. Coverage can reflect the ethnic loyalties of the writers or media houses. And I'm taking you to the elections of 2022. And I think you saw even the Media Council itself bring out a report on how media houses covered the presidential candidates.
Yes.
And I think the biggest complaint came from the current president, who said the media was completely unfair against him.
Yes.
In a situation like that where media stands in the dock, what is the way forward?
Well, I think if a media house is going to lean one way or another, they must disclose that they are doing it where they're coming from, you understand? So that the viewers will have knowledge of that this is what they are pushing. And we've seen it in other countries where if you watch, for example, Fox News, you know that is a conservative news channel. If you watch MSNBC, is more liberal. And so there's nothing really fatal about it as long as it's done in the open. Yes.
Which takes me to the point. Are we there as a country where we can define media freedom as media freedom to allow us space to do what we are doing? For example, like the situation you're citing in the US.
Yes.
I think even the general public has accepted that a media house can take a position.
Yes.
Have we gotten there as a country where probably a Kenyan media house can take a position on a debate such as sensitive as a presidential contest?
Clearly we have, because that is what happened last time.
But we didn't come out in the open.
Yeah, but they should have come out in the open. And so that whoever is watching is well aware that this is now not really information that is being sieved from an impartial point of view, but sort of actually advertising for a certain candidate. Yeah.
Which actually reminds me that in the height of these demonstrations, the Honorable Raila Odinga talked about boycotting Radio Africa, and particularly the Star newspaper.
Yes.
I think after several days of outcry from the media sector, he revoked that and said that he would write a complaint to yourselves,
yes.
the Media Complaints Commission. Yeah. Has he done that?
So far we have not received any such complaint.
None at all?
Yes. We have not received any such complaint. And I think it is, politicians will be politicians, but I think it's a slippery slope when we start picking and choosing which media houses we want to have issues with, because that is actually what endangers journalists when they're in the field, they are profiled. If you come from XY, your opinion must be against our person or for our person, which now leads to attacks in some situations. Yeah.
Knowing that this avenue exists, of course, the complaints we heard from the elections, because even candidates other than the presidential candidates, there are other candidates in the other positions available that complained of probably being targeted by one media house or being denied equal airtime alongside other candidates. How many complaints did you receive probably last year?
So the Media Council is the one that dealt with that issue of fair and balanced reporting, and since all media houses receive spectrum and signal from the Communications Authority, they have a bare minimum duty to ensure that they report almost on an equal basis. You understand? So when they do not do that is when the Media Council came in. But we did not receive any specific complaint regarding Media House X and Y over reporting of the elections.
Clearly, politicians will always be politicians, because that's all these things, they just converse in political podiums and then don't make complaints. Which leads me to the other point. There's this group of people we call quacks. I think you've heard that reference.
Yes.
And when you talk about quacks, obviously, doesn't mean really they are quacks. Probably they're trained journalists, but then again, probably their conduct does not fit into the normal ethics of journalism. What is the Media Council doing about that group?
The Media Council is big on accreditation. And so they ensure that the people in the newsrooms are accredited, and being accredited means that at least at some level you've received training on the code of conduct of the practice of journalism in Kenya. And that's where we come in. So whenever we get complaints, we actually are determining whether the code of conduct has been violated or not. So there is things that are done, but these days the landscape is quite wide. We have celebrity reporters who have no training at all. Some are comedians, and so how do you hold them into account? What we are trying to do is to ensure that media houses give training or make them aware of the code of conduct. You know, other than probably some of the contributors we have on TV or on radio, particularly the ones covering functions across the country. Some of these people are calling quacks flash out your badges from the Media Council of Kenya, and they are genuine, meaning they were accredited by the Media Council of Kenya. What is the procedure of accreditation? How do you verify that this person is credible? I think even before I answer that, it means if they have the training and have the accreditation, it is now part of that what we call the diversity of Media Council. I mean of the media in Kenya, to ensure that if there are quacks, that their listenership will not go as far as, will not reach a certain point. The argument is usually that freedom of expression, the better ideas will drown out the bad ideas. And so that is probably the argument. The media is not unique in that. There are professions like the law society, professions like the accountants, who, yes, there are problematic people, there are complaints mechanisms, but still you'd find that sometimes they fall down the cracks. Traditional media is obviously being threatened by new media or emerging media, what you'd call emerging media. Is that an advancement of freedom of expression or a clawback? Yes and no. First of all, in Kenya, the trends are not as global as you think, because Kenyans still listen to radio and watch TV a lot, unlike other places where those mediums are, legacy media is going away. But the disadvantage of it is that the role of the editor is diminished, meaning that anyone is a publisher, and media ethics and the processes of getting to the truth are sometimes lacking, because now everyone is a publisher. You can find a blogger who has more viewership than other legacy media. That's true. And that when you look at it that way, because there's no gatekeeping here at that point, like you say, and then you cannot be able to hold them accountable. And I think there was an attempt to introduce regulation around blogging. But then again, like you said, protection through the court. But my big question is, at this point then, where you have information out there without any responsibility or accountability, do we say we are advancing the freedom of expression, or we are actually abusing the freedom of expression? I think we should hammer down the fact that freedom of expression does not extend to X, Y, and Z. Propaganda for war, incitement to violence, vilification of others, and discrimination, right? And so that when everyone knows that, especially when people who have platforms that reach many people, then when they violate that, they can be held to account. All right. There's something called an economic squeeze, and this is where I want us to talk about probably before we wind up. Part of the claw on media freedom is advertising blackmail. How do we deal with that? Well, yeah, but it's a global issue. I sort of studied what went on in Hungary, for example, in terms of the media being subjected to, for example, sometimes a government that wants to choose who they advertise with, and if they dangle that carrot, then all the stories that are coming out are positive towards that government. It is something that is happening, and there needs to be a way to liberalize advertising space. And this is not only done by governments. There are certain corporations that are big, so big that you'd rarely find any media house that is willing to write any negative story about them, because that would be economic suicide. And so media houses need to diversify. We have seen, for example, some Kenyan newspapers that are now subscriber-based, especially online, and that is a step in the right direction, so that they do not rely so much on the old model of government advertising.
From where you sit, because the formation of the government advertising agency, in the eyes of probably private media houses, was a plot by the previous administration to deny them of government advertising, and therefore deny them revenue and force them to toe the line. Is that a position probably you think is correct from where you sit?
You can say that it is correct, because it was done during the time when the government was quite deliberate on accusing media houses of not serving the purposes that they would want them to serve. And there were certain utterances about what newspapers are used for. Yes. And so, you could argue, because it has really dented the viability of certain legacy media. But change is inevitable. Sometimes these things have to happen, and media houses have to figure out how they'll survive or not. There was a period in the US that a newspaper was closing every day. And it's just happening because the models have changed.
What does pure remuneration of the workforce or journalists do to media freedom?
It jeopardizes media freedom, because first of all, it makes journalists susceptible to control from politicians, for example. You've heard of the arguments about brown envelopes and such and such. There needs to be better, better unions that will champion for better remuneration. But the thing is that these are private enterprises. It is hard to force them to pay in a certain manner, and so it's a very difficult question to ensure that all media houses have a living. All media practitioners have a living wage.
And of course, the times they're living in are very difficult. I think there are several media houses facing a lot of problems when it comes to finances, and they're reducing their workforce, obviously weakening the gatekeeping process in those media houses, and again compromising on media freedom, like you say. What should we look forward to tomorrow?
Tomorrow we're looking forward to sharing of ideas on how to improve the space, and improving the space is improving on our democracy, and it ensures that whenever a politician speaks, their words are not taken at face value, that there's a critical analysis of what they're saying, and to ensure that Kenyans are a more informed group of people who will make better informed decisions.
Are you going to be awarding journalists tomorrow?
Yes.
You will be?
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dimas Kiprono, Commissioner of the Media Complaints Commission, and thank you very much for joining us, and we hope that we can continue building on the blocks available to advance media freedom, and particularly the agenda of freedom of expression as a driver of all other human rights. Your last word in 1 minute.
Yes, it is your right to seek, receive, and impart information. And when you do that, you can better secure all other rights.
Thank you very much. It's time for us to take a breather. When we come back in the second hour, we have a different conversation. Don't go too far. And of course, we continue monitoring the situation in the CBD and other streets in the town, obviously owing to the resumption of demonstrations by the Azimio la Umoja coalition. Don't go too far.